The reading's taken from Exodus chapter 33, first 3 verses, and then from verse 12. Reading from the New International Version. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Leave this place, you and the people you brought up out of Egypt, and go up to the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go with you, because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way." And then from verse 12, Moses said to the Lord, "You have been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your ways, so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people." The Lord replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Then Moses said to him, "If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth?" And the Lord said to Moses, "I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you, and I know you by name." Then Moses said, "Now show me your glory."
Thank you, Andy. So when I was about 21 or 22 years old, I was walking down a street in Toronto, or Toronto, if you live there. Ellen probably calls it Toronto now, with a couple friends of mine. Young street, big, long street, surrounded by big buildings, massive city in Canada, just with two friends. And it was in the autumn, and so we'd been at camp all summer, Muskoka Woods, for those of you who know it. And we were talking about another friend of ours who lives on the west coast of Canada. And we were like, I wonder what he's doing now. And so my one friend says, well, why don't we call him? And we were like, what? Now, the story I'm going to tell will relate to anyone my age or older. And if you're below my age, you will think that is such a dumb story. Of course, this is all possible. Put on the next slide. So, my friend said, why don't we call him? And we're like, what? What do you mean call him? Well, this was in the era when mobile phones were first coming on the scene. I don't actually think I'd ever seen physically a mobile phone before. A cell phone, as you'd call it in North America. And my friend pulls out of his pocket, not this. This was like already a year old. He pulled out the very first Motorola flip phone. I don't have a picture of it, but you had to hold it about that size. And it flipped out, and it had a beautiful brown case. And we both went, whoa. Like, we were so jealous. And I don't remember whether he dialed the number or whether he had the number in his phone. I don't remember. But he's like, as we're talking about our friend on the west coast of Canada, he's like, why don't we just call him and see how he is? And we're like, yes, let's do that. So he dials his number, whatever, and ring, 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 and then hello. And we're like, hey, how's it going, man? And there was no speaker, so I think we all had to like just go up to the phone like that. How's it going? What are you doing? And he said, I'm sitting in my parents' hot tub on their deck. And this was on Vancouver Island on the west coast of Canada. And I remember just like, I'm walking down a street in Toronto. I'm not connected to any wires. My friend's sitting in a hot tub on the west coast of Canada, and we're just chatting like it's every day. How cool is this? And all the kids go, and? But some of us go, yeah, that was do you remember that moment, the first time you saw a mobile phone? So, I was so envious of my friend Because more than that, this was the guy who had everything. He had this phone, obviously. He had a Golf. Nobody in North America, young people, had a Golf. I drove, it was a Pontiac Firefly, doesn't matter, dumb little car. I had a car though. But he had a Golf. He also always had the latest snowboard. And I know this because I bought his used snowboard off him, but he had the Burton Pro model, the brand new one. I had the old one. And so he had everything. But here's the thing. He had everything except one of the things he wanted most: a relationship with his father. His parents had split up a few years earlier, and one of the reasons why he had everything was that his parents vied for his attention by buying him bigger and better gifts. And his father bought him much bigger gifts because he had a great job, but he worked all the time. My friend literally, and I was envious of him for it, had everything a 21, 2, 3-year-old could want, except the thing he wanted most: relationship. I vividly remember this scene from when I was about 22 years old. But what does this have to do with the book of Exodus? So we're about to explore two big themes in the book of Exodus today, and it could really be said that these two themes are the things that this whole book is pushing us towards. Stick them up there. One is this: God's presence over his presence, over stuff. And the other is God's glory is who he is. You got it? That's where we're going, so you can keep track of where we are. So you may be glad to know, or you may not, this is our last day in the book of Exodus. We're actually, in theory, going through 7 chapters today, but we're totally not going through 7 chapters. We're camping in one chapter and just dipping into the next. But these chapters are so important, and these themes are so important. This is actually profoundly important to start a new year with. I'm so glad it landed on this day. But let's jump back for a second. So a few weeks ago, last time with Ali, we were in the story in the section of the golden calf. So the people had just been rescued from brutal slavery in Egypt, and then they just witnessed several months of the most incredible miracles the world had ever seen, including they literally had their food like Uber delivered to them by the frost or by the dew every morning that they could eat. And then in the midst of this, Moses had gone up Mount Horeb to hear the voice, to hear the message of God, because the rest of the people could not go, or they would die if they saw him. And if we remember in the story, Moses went up and then he came down fairly quickly because he wanted to tell or maybe God sent him down to tell the people just the 10 commandments. Don't worship any other gods. This is really important, don't make idols in the form of anything on earth to worship. And it goes on, honor your father and mother, and so on, all these 10 commandments. And then Moses came down and told the people these things, and they heard them and they said, yes, yes, we want this. And they bowed and they worshiped God. And then Moses went back up the mountain to hear the rest of the stuff from God. But we know the story. As they waited, a few days became a few weeks. And in our minds, incredibly quickly, they leaped back to their old ways and their old habits. They couldn't help falling back into one of the regular parts of life in Egypt. They just wanted a God that they could see and they could touch. And they just probably wanted something that was safe and easy. They couldn't resist going back to their old ways. And the story of that Ali covered fits into this incredibly timely part of the story. Because what's happening on the mountain as the people of Israel are putting together this golden calf God was giving Moses detailed instructions about how he would build a tabernacle. Exodus 25:8, God says, "Make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among you." So just as God is telling Moses how he is going to establish a way for him to live among them, they're busy making a gold calf, a cheap, in comparison, imitation to God. So here's a question, kind of a side question as we start today. How often do we settle for an imitation? There's only truly one real thing, but there's lots of realer things and lots of faker things. But the problem is the real thing takes too long, doesn't it? Whatever that goal you really want to achieve, it's too hard, it's too difficult, it takes too long. So we so often settle for the easier, the quicker, the shorter route. But whatever that is, we most of the time end up with very little or nothing in our hands. How often do we settle for an imitation? It's a pretty important question as we start 2025. But back to the book. What happened? People, the few who had been faithful to grab their swords and run through the camp and slaughtered those, possibly those who had been the leaders of this rebellion. This is a brutal scene right in the back of this. And we know the story. God said he wanted to wipe out the people and start again with Moses. But God relented when Moses reminded him of his promise to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. God relented when Moses pleaded. But I think what's really going on here is God just wanted to use this whole situation to show these people and to show us the fullness and beauty of his character, which we're going to see laid out in these next chapters. It's really powerful. So what happened next? Andy just read it. We're just going to read the first 3 verses. Exodus 33. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Leave this place. You and the people you brought up out of Egypt must leave it. Go up to the land I promised to give Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. I said to them, I will give it to your children after you. I will send an angel ahead of you. I will drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Go up to the land that has plenty of milk and honey." And as I read this, I think, that sounds like a pretty good deal. So what you're saying here, God, is even though we just completely disobeyed you, even though we just rejected you and replaced you with a statue made of gold and then had a huge drunken party to celebrate it, even though we just did all that, you're not going to destroy us. And in fact, you're going to give us everything you promised Abraham. You're going to give us the land flowing with milk and honey. How many of us would grab that deal right out of God's hand before we had a chance to say anything else or do anything else? Yes, done, deal, we're gone, God, fantastic.
But there's a catch. Exodus 33, second part. But I will not go with you. You are stubborn, and I might destroy you on the way. So God will give his people his promised land, but without his presence. All the presence, all the blessing of God, all that they could ask for without God himself. Would you take that deal? Here's a pretty provocative statement from Tim Chester. He said, often we live as though we would. Here's how it looks. You want God to bless you, to forgive you, to rescue you from hell, to provide a spouse or job or good health, but you don't really want God himself. You don't want the demands his presence makes. You don't want to make the changes his presence demands. So this looks like a good deal. Ponder that for a second. Is he right? But even though the Israelites had totally blown, completely forgotten about God and turned toward this cheap imitation, when faced with the full reality of the consequences of their decision, this is what they say. Verse 4. When the people heard these painful words, they began to mourn. They were just offered everything they've ever dreamed of. Freedom, a land of their own, prosperity, it's flowing with milk and honey. And they finally sort of realize that without God, it will never be. When are you and I going to realize that? There's another pretty important question, 2025. In the West today, we know most of us have more than enough stuff. And yet there are always just a few more things, right? That if I just had that, if I just had this, then I'd be satisfied. And Christmas is totally the time for this. I'm just waiting for those presents. If I just got those clothes, or if I just got that watch, or if I just got those gadgets, then I'll be satisfied. We don't use those words, of course. Maybe we do. But we all fall for this again and again. And it's actually the story we're told on every form of media we consume every day. Just that one more thing will be enough. And that's why we desperately need the history that the Bible gives us. And that's why we desperately need the wisdom of people who have gone before us. Here's another quote from C.S. Lewis this time. If we find ourselves with a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. Nothing in this world can satisfy the deepest longings of your heart. We were made, next slide, we were made for Moses absolutely knew this. Moses had been in the presence of God, and he was not about to settle for anything else. No way, God. Do we know it? So some time passes in the story, and we don't know how much, but enough time for Moses to set up a tent outside the camp, a place where he can go and petition God on behalf of the people. And we don't know all the conversations he has with God, but we get a glimpse into one of them, and it's really amazing. Exodus 33, verse 12. Moses said to the Lord, "You've been telling me lead these people, but you haven't let me know whom you will send with me. You've said, I know your name, I know all about you, and I'm pleased with you. If you are pleased with me, teach me more about yourself. Then I can know you and I can continue to please you. Remember that this nation is your people." Moses is so bold with God. And to that boldness and that hunger, the Lord replies, "I will go with you, and I will give you rest." And then Moses says again, "If you don't go with us, don't send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and your people? You must go with us. How else will we be different than all the other people on the face of the earth?" And the Lord said to Moses, "I will do exactly what you have asked. I am pleased with you. I know your name. I know all about you." It's not enough. Now, show me your glory. This is such a powerful scene. Moses has the chance to lead this people into the promised land, and all the other nations are going to be crushed before them. And then they have this chance to have all that the world has to offer. But what does he want? He wants to learn more about God. This is Moses. He wants to know him more, and he wants to see his glory. I want to see your glory. Because Moses again knew that nothing else would ever satisfy him. He knew he was made for more. As we start 2025, do we know this? Do you know that you were made for more than anything in this world can offer? Stuff won't satisfy you or me. I think it will. And we need stuff. Relationships ultimately won't satisfy, but we were built for relationship. We need community. Even marriage and kids are amazing, are a blessing, but will not satisfy you. We were made for more. Knowing God, this is the lesson here, knowing God more and deeper is the only way to satisfy the longings of your heart. Last Sunday was brilliant. If you hear, Ali and Ian and Carrie shared with us, and it's not recorded in any format, so you can't hear it. I wish you were more of you were here, but if you didn't, go chat with them afterwards and then ask them to pray with you. Ian and Carrie. So good. But I think what Mark Peters said in sort of, I wasn't trying to summarize it, but he summed it up well. He said, the one word that I'm hearing God say this morning through all this is connection. We sometimes think we need more stuff to make us happy. We know that won't work. Or we need to do stuff. We need to pray more. We need to read more. We need to listen more to find what I'm looking for. And that's good, but what we're really looking for in that is connection with the God of the universe. That is there a more important lesson or point to ponder as we start 2025? connection with God is everything. So here's a question for us as we start 2025. What rhythms, what habits, what patterns and practices do you need to establish? Not to set up a bunch of tick boxes that if you do this, your day will be fine. That's totally not how it works. But habits that will feed your soul, habits that will draw you toward the connection that your heart and mind are looking for. And what habits do you know are not feeding you? What habits do you need to get rid of to make space and place and silence for the King of Kings? We all need the Bible. God's word, Hebrews 4 says it's alive and active, and it is. We all need to listen to and talk to God. His Holy Spirit is present with us. But each of us will do this in totally different ways. You are not me. I'm not you. My strengths, my gifts are different. My personality is different. My season of life is different. But what will it look like for you to connect, to seek connection with God in 2020? Maybe we need to pray a version of Moses' prayer. Have a look at this. This is a rewrite. Just pray. Lord, you tell me. I know your name, and I know all about you. You say that because of Jesus, I am holy and clean, and you are pleased with me. So teach me more about yourself. Then I can know you and please you. If you don't go with me today, don't let me go anywhere. How else will anyone know that I'm yours? You must go with me. Father, please show me. How about that as a prayer to pray every morning this week? We need presence over presence. You don't need more stuff. I don't need more stuff in 2025. I desperately need to experience the presence of God. So the next big question, final question is, what is God's glory? Moses asked God to show him his glory. So what did God show him? Look at this, 33, starting at 19. The Lord said, I will make all my goodness pass in front of you, but you can't see my face, he said. No one can see my face and stay alive. The Lord continued, there's a place near me where you can stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in an opening in the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I'm passed by. Then I will remove my hand, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. Then the Lord came down in the cloud, verse 5. He stood there with Moses and announced his name, the Lord. And as he passed in front of Moses, he called out, I am the Lord. I am the God who is tender and kind. I am gracious. I am slow to get angry, and I am faithful and full of love. I continue to show my love to thousands of people. I forgive those who do evil. I forgive those who refuse to obey me. This would have been poignant. And I forgive those who sin. But I do not let guilty people go without punishing them. I cause their sins of their parents to affect their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And Moses bowed to the ground and worshiped. What's the glory that God reveals? It's not some amazing light show. It's not God going, look how amazing I am. Look how big I am. Look how cool I am. He's not showing beauty, natural, or strength. God shows or tells Moses the beauty and the fullness of his name and the breadth of his love. God's glory is who he is. How powerful and mind-blowing would it have been to have heard this immediately after your people had just rejected and rebelled against, created a golden calf, and then had a drunken party to celebrate it. And before God tells him about his holiness and justice, I don't let the guilty go unpunished. Just before that, he says, I forgive those who do evil. I forgive those who refuse to obey me. What? And I forgive those who sin. That's what God tells us is his glory. Remember, we've said all along through this journey that everything about the history of Exodus, everything about what God reveals to his people is actually pointing to Jesus. Moses said, God, show me your glory. And God said, well, I'll tell you about it and I'll sort of hide you from it. But in 1,500 years, your ancestors are going to see the fullness of it. John 1:14 says this, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. The Prince of Peace was the fullness of the glory of God. This is what it looked like. Born in a stable, raised as a refugee, son of a carpenter, and then rejected by his own village because you're just Joseph's son. He ate and drank with the poor and the outcasts. He talked with and healed the unclean and the untouchables. He was arrested like a criminal. He was nailed and killed on a cross, all so the world could see the glory of God through this life and this death and this resurrection. God said it to Moses on this day, I am gracious and compassionate. I am slow to anger and rich and unfailing. I will not let the guilty go unpunished. In fact, I'm going to punish my own son brutally so that the guilty can be forgiven. You and me. The glory of God. God's presence over his presence. Moses was offered all the blessings of the world, and he knew it would never be enough. God's glory is who he is. God's glory is seen in the powerful, beautiful grace and truth of the life, and death, and resurrection of Jesus. God's message of Exodus, and for us today, is to point us to his presence, in his glory, in his incredible Son. He's telling us how we need to experience this presence. But there's good news in the midst of this. It's not really about you. It's not about you trying harder or working better or getting that devotional habit. I got that just sort of perfectly with all the ticks. It's totally not about you never failing in 2025. It's about God's grace, God's patience, and Jesus' life and death and resurrection. And you just turning and saying, I need that I need. We're going to worship here. But as we go into worship, and I want to do one more thing with you in the midst of worship, but as we go into worship, I want to leave this question burning in your minds. If the only thing that will satisfy the longings of your heart is the presence of God, what rhythms, what habits, what patterns and practices do you need to establish? Not to tick a box, but to connect with what your soul longs for. What does that need to look like for me? What does it need to look like for you as we enter into 2020? Ponder that as we worship Him. Lord, help, because we need it. Help us to want your presence and your glory like Moses did, like nothing else satisfies. Help us, Jesus, we pray.